The duffel bag was sitting open on the bed when I came upstairs. Not the suitcase. That was the first thing I noticed. My husband always packed in the hard-shell carry-on for anything longer than 2 nights. The slate gray one with the TSA lock he'd bought himself before a firm retreat 3 years ago. This time, it was the soft-sided duffel, the camping one, sitting open on the comforter like he'd thrown it there in a hurry and hadn't thought twice. I stood in the doorway. He was at the closet pulling out a dress shirt, a charcoal one, the kind he wore when he was trying to impress someone new rather than someone who already knew him. He didn't hear me come in. "Dressy for an urban planning summit," I said. He turned. The smallest flicker of something crossed his face. Not guilt, not quite. More like recalibration. "Dinner, the first night. You know how these conferences go." He folded the shirt with the precision he only reserved for things he actually cared about. "Flight's at 6:40. I need to be out of here by 3:30. 3:30. I like being early. My husband was the person who jogged through airports with his boarding pass still loading. I had watched him nearly miss a connection to Chicago because he didn't see the point in sitting at a gate. But I didn't say that. I had gotten very good at not saying things. Piper was at the kitchen table when I came back downstairs, her sketchbook open, a half-eaten apple going brown on the plate beside it. She was drawing something with deliberate, angular strokes. A house, I realized after a moment. But the house had no windows. "Dad's leaving," I said. She didn't look up. "I know." Kit came in from the garage, with his safety goggles pushed up on his forehead and his hands smelling like electrical tape and solder. He was 8 and already building things I could only half follow. "Is he going to that conference?" "Urban Planning Summit, Denver." Kit considered this. "He said he'd watch my demo Thursday." The sentence just sat there between us. "The robotics club demonstration?" I asked. "He promised. 2 weeks ago at dinner." Kit pulled off the goggles and turned them over in his hands. "But Miss Farrell records them now for parents who can't make it. He said it the way children say things they've had to practice saying until the hurt went smooth and flat. Like a fact, not a wound." I made dinner. I made sure we ate. I listened to Piper explain the technical difference between cold press and hot press watercolor paper for 20 minutes, and I asked real questions, because I knew how to be present even when I was being carved out from the inside. After they were in bed, I sat at my desk. The house was quiet, in the specific way it had been quiet for almost 2 years. Not peaceful, just depressurized. Like something was always about to happen and never quite did. Psst. My husband's presence had been draining away so gradually that I'd convinced myself it was work pressure, a difficult development cycle, the ordinary friction of a long marriage. I had told myself this enough times. It had stopped feeling like something I was saying, and started feeling like something I simply knew. I opened my laptop. I was going through invoices, checking my studio's project calendar, Caulfield design, landscape architecture, mine in the way that only things you've bled for feel like yours. When I scrolled to the shared card statement, almost didn't look. Boss, almost. The charge was 4 days old and I'd missed it in the weekly sweep. $382, Cascade Botanicals, Bend, Oregon. I stared at it. Bend was 3 hours south. My husband had no clients in Bend. We had no family there. I pulled up Cascade Botanicals in a new tab. Luxury floral boutique, high-end arrangements for life's most significant occasions. Weddings, anniversaries, and, according to a small banner along the top of the page, curated welcome arrangements for new arrival and birth celebrations. The feeling that moved through me then wasn't anger. It was something quieter and more terrible. A kind of settling. Like a structure that had been shifting on its foundation for 2 years and had finally, silently come to rest. I typed, Bend, Oregon Private Maternity Retreat Luxury. The fourth result loaded in muted sage and warm cream. Timberline Birth and Wellness Retreat. Boutique prenatal and postpartum care in Central Oregon's most serene setting. Private suites. Curated birth experiences. Absolute discretion for discerning families. Absolute discretion. On our Wells Fargo joint card. Closed the laptop. I walked down the hall and stood in the doorway of Kit's room. He was asleep with his arm around a foam cylinder, a prototype of something, rocket or turbine. I could never fully tell anymore. In Piper's room, her breathing was steady and slow. I walked back to my desk. I searched. Portland, Oregon, private investigator, licensed discreet. Them. The investigator had a plain office in the Pearl District and a handshake like a closing door. He listened without reacting. He asked precise questions and told me his rate. I wrote a check from the personal account my husband had no access to. The one I'd kept separate, quietly, for no reason I'd ever let myself name out loud. That had been smart of me. I hadn't known why at the time. He called 5 days later. I was in my car on a side street in northwest Portland, parked in front of nothing in particular. Your husband didn't fly to Denver, he said. His car's in long-term at PDX, but he ride-shared to a private charter terminal in Troutdale. Flew into Redmond Municipal, east side of Bend. The air felt thinner. His parents' motorhome, I said. It came out before I'd fully thought it. They had a Class A. His parents, the kind of people who called a 3-week RV circuit through the Southwest a proper adventure. They'd canceled a planned summer trip to Crater Lake, citing his father's back. Spotted at a private RV park 4 miles outside Bend, the investigator said, 3 consecutive days. His sisters told me they were at a spa weekend in Scottsdale. Either one flew to Arizona. One drove a rental car south on I-5. The rental agreement listed Bend as the destination. I have a contact. He called back in a day. There's a 2-week reservation at Timberline Birth and Wellness under the name Halstead, he said. That's his mother's maiden name. I knew it. I'd known it for 11 years. She'd mentioned it once on a beach trip almost by accident, and I'd remembered it because I remembered everything that might ever matter. Is he there now? Yes. Wire transfer paid the reservation in full. Originating account is an LLC called Ridgeline Capital, registered in Wyoming. I'm still tracing the beneficial ownership, but the paper trail is there. I need to see it. I know you do. He sent me a secure link 3 days later. I was in my home office, with the door locked and the children at school. The video loaded, shot through glass from a distance but clear. Room was bright and warm. Mountain light through tall pine windows. Flowers, the $382 flowers, in a large vase on a side table. My husband was standing in the center of the room, in jeans and a flannel I'd never seen more relaxed than I'd watched him be in 3 years. He had his arm loosely around a young woman in a white robe, blonde, visibly very pregnant, laughing at something he'd just said. His parents were there. His father held a glass and stood the way he stood when he was proud of something. His mother was arranging the flowers I'd paid for. Both sisters were on a love seat, one of them taking pictures on her phone. It looked exactly like a celebration, because it was one. His mother lifted her glass. The audio was muffled at the distance, so the investigator had added a text transcription at the bottom of the frame. Pet. This little boy is finally the heir we always knew we were meant to have. The world didn't go dark. It went perfectly, terribly still. Pob. I watched my husband lean down and press his lips to the top of the young woman's head. I watched his father put a hand on his shoulder with a specific pride I recognized. I had spent 11 years trying to earn a version of that expression, and never quite managed it. I watched his sisters raise their glasses. I watched his mother look at that woman's stomach with a tenderness I had seen before twice, briefly, once when she held Piper for the first time in the hospital, and once for a shorter moment with Kit. And then it had faded, and I had told myself she was just reserved, that she warmed slowly, that it wasn't what it looked like. I understood now what I had been too willing to explain away. I closed the laptop. I did not cry. I sat completely still for 4 minutes. Then I picked up my phone and called the attorney whose number I had saved 18 months ago, when the cracks were still fine as thread and I'd told myself I was being paranoid but saved the number anyway. She answered on the first ring. "It's me," I said. "I have everything, we move now." She was at my house in 80 minutes. She set her briefcase on the kitchen table and skipped the condolences, which was exactly what I needed. She reviewed the bank statements, the Ridgeline Capital wire transfers, the investigator's report, and the video. She read in silence. When she finished, she looked at me over her reading glasses. "Oregon is a no-fault state," she said, "but documented dissipation of marital assets at this scale changes the calculation significantly. The forensic accounting will trace every dollar. We file an emergency TRO to freeze all joint accounts, and we file the dissolution petition simultaneously." She made a note. "How much do you have in assets he has no access to?" I told her. Her expression didn't change, but she made another note. "Move 80% of that today into a new sole ownership account at an institution he's never heard of. The rest goes into irrevocable educational and healthcare trusts for the children. Judges in this county respond well to that. It says you're protecting them, not looting the estate. The house. List it. Who's your realtor?" I gave her the name of a woman who had been asking to list our property for 3 years and said things like, "I could move this in a weekend with a flatness I'd always found a little much. I had stopped finding it a little much. Call her today. Price it to close fast. Cash buyer. No contingencies. You need to be out legally and physically before he returns." She closed her portfolio. "Do you have somewhere to go?" The Barlow building downtown does corporate furnished rentals. I design their lobby. The building manager owes me a favor." She almost smiled. "Use your LLC for the lease, month to month. And the children's school. Withdraw them immediately. Where can they go that's excellent and far?" "Whitmore Academy in Vermont." I said it before I'd fully decided, but I had known it the second she asked. "It's where I went. My father is on the board. They have a summer program. Call him tonight. Get both children enrolled before your husband can file any counter-motion regarding jurisdiction." She stood. "The next 72 hours are critical. Speed is your weapon. He thinks he has another week in Bend. We have to be finished before he lands." That night, I sat down with Piper and Kit at the kitchen table. I had thought about this conversation all day. In the car, between phone calls, in the 4 minutes I'd let myself sit on the bathroom floor with the door locked. I was not going to lie to them. They were too sharp for lies, and they deserved far better than the careful, well-intentioned versions of the truth I'd been offering for 2 years. "Your father hasn't been honest with us," I said. "He's been making choices that hurt our family. He's been in a relationship with someone else, and she's going to have a baby." Kit was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that why he always seems like he's somewhere else even when he's here?" "Yes, I think that's a large part of it." Piper had her hands flat on the table. "Has it been going on a long time?" "Thought long enough." She nodded slowly. The way she processed things she didn't want to process, with the deliberate patience of someone much older than 11. Then she said very quietly, "He came to my show in March. The one at the community center. He stood in front of my biggest piece for about 30 seconds and said it was interesting, and then he checked his phone." She looked at the table. "His mother uses that word for things she doesn't want to think about." I covered her hand with mine. "Your work is extraordinary," I said. "And his inability to see it is a fact about him, not about you. It has never been about you." Kit came around the table and hugged me from the side, his arms around my ribs, his head against my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He communicated in proximity. After a moment, Piper looked up. "What happens now?" "Now we protect ourselves. We're moving temporarily to a place he can't just walk into. And I'm enrolling you both at Whitmore Academy in Vermont for the rest of the summer and the fall." Piper's eyes went wide. "That's where you went." That's where I went." Kit pulled back and studied me with the focused seriousness he used on structural problems. "Is it safe?" "It's the safest place I know, And Kit, the robotics program. I slid my phone across with the program page already loaded. They have a full maker lab and a faculty advisor who's published in IEEE robotics. He looked at the screen. Then he looked at me. Then he squared his small shoulders the way he did when he'd made a decision. Okay. Piper looked between us. We should have a name. A team name. Team Caulfield, Kit said, no hesitation. My maiden name. The name on my studio door. The name that had been mine before anything else. Team Caulfield, I said. The next 72 hours were a machine I kept running. I opened a sole ownership account at a credit union on the east side of Portland that my husband had never driven past. I moved the bulk of my liquid assets before noon. My attorney filed the emergency TRO on all joint accounts at Wells Fargo by end of business, citing documented dissipation, and had it granted by the following morning. A forensic accountant was retained. I called the Barlow building, and the lease was signed through my LLC by that evening. I called Whitmore Academy and mentioned my father's name, and had enrollment confirmations for both children within 36 hours. My realtor had a cash offer above asking price, with a 10-day close and 0 contingencies before the weekend. We packed what mattered, not everything. Kit packed his hard drive, his current project kit, and 2 robotics trophies, the regional one and the state qualifier. He left the participation plaques on the shelf without being asked. He also packed a small framed drawing Piper had done of him at his workbench, focused, bent over something small and intricate. He wrapped it carefully in a t-shirt. Piper packed her watercolor set, her portfolio binder, 4 sketchbooks. She took down the large canvas she'd done of me laughing in the kitchen. Her father had looked at it for 30 seconds and called it interesting, and wrapped it herself in the packing paper she found in the garage closet. She left the pink jewelry box. His mother had sent 3 Christmases in a row, without looking inside it once. I packed birth certificates, passports, social security cards, tax returns, medical records. The folder I'd labeled, quietly, Ridgeline Capital, with 14 months of annotated bank statements. I packed a locket with my mother's photograph. I packed the children's first day of school pictures. Every year, the stack held together with a rubber band. Puff. I left the furniture. I left the art we'd chosen together at galleries we'd walked through on dates that felt like a different lifetime. I left 11 years of the careful aesthetics of a life that had been built on sand, and I did not look back at it. He came home on a Wednesday. His key didn't work. My attorney had filed for exclusive use of the marital residence under the TRO, which Oregon statute supported, and the locks had been changed with full legal authority. The for sale sign was on the lawn. He called 14 times. I let them go. He came to my studio. My assistant told him calmly that I was in off-site meetings indefinitely and handed him my attorney's business card. He called the children's school. The registrar told him the children had been disenrolled and their records transferred, and that further inquiries should go to my attorney. Pond. I heard all of this secondhand. I was not present for any of it. I was on a video call with Whitmore Academy's summer coordinator, watching Piper gesture animatedly at something on an easel across the room, watching Kit write something down after a teacher said something he found worth writing. Process. The process server found my husband at his attorney's office 4 business days after I filed the dissolution petition. The investigator's declaration was attached as an exhibit. The Ridgeline Capital wire transfer records were Exhibit A. The video with the audio transcription was Exhibit C. My attorney told me his attorney called her within 3 hours. He sounded, she said, like he hadn't slept. The deposition was in a conference room downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the Willamette. My husband looked reduced. The careful confidence he'd carried to Bend drained out, replaced by something tighter and more fragile. His attorney was competent. My attorney was better. He held it together for almost an hour. Then my attorney asked him to explain, in his own words, why he had established Ridgeline Capital LLC without his spouse's knowledge, and used it to redirect community property. Because she manages everything, he said. His voice was too loud for the room. Our life was managed, the house was managed, the kids were managed. She never needed anything from me. She never let herself need anything. He stopped, pressed his palms flat on the table. Sasha actually needs me. She's warm. She wanted a family, a real one, not a well-run household. I let the silence sit. Then, very quietly, so that the court reporter leaned forward slightly, Kit built a 12-function autonomous rover this year. He named it after the creek where we camped when he was 5. He's been trying to tell you about it for 8 months. I paused. Pav. Piper placed second in the Pacific Northwest Youth Watercolor Competition in April. She didn't tell you she'd entered because she already knew you wouldn't come to the show. He stared at me. They noticed everything, I said. They kept a kind of accounting of you that you never knew existed, and you called them managed. His attorney put a hand on his arm. He didn't shake it off this time. He just looked at the table. Pot. Your client's statements are noted for the record, my attorney said pleasantly, and made a small mark on her legal pad. The Biram. The judge at the temporary orders hearing was a woman in her late 50s with a reputation, according to my attorney, for absolute intolerance toward financial concealment and parental neglect. She reviewed the binders with focused, unhurried thoroughness. She watched the video clip. She read the Ridgeline Capital transfer documentation and the forensic accountant's preliminary findings showing 14 months of systematic withdrawals from the joint saving account, all under $3,000 to avoid automatic alerts, all wired through the Wyoming LLC. She granted temporary sole legal and physical custody to me, supervised visitation only, 2 hours, bi-weekly, at a court-approved family center, with a professional monitor present, all marital assets frozen, forensic accounting of all accounts associated with Ridgeline Capital, PAMA. My husband ordered to pay 100% of my attorney's fees, citing the documented, intentional nature of the financial misconduct that had made this litigation necessary. She also noted, for the record, that the testimony and documentary evidence painted a picture of a family-wide, coordinated effort to conceal the respondent's conduct, and that this pattern would be relevant to any future custody modification requests. His parents settled the civil claim 6 weeks later. They wired the settlement amount directly into the irrevocable educational and healthcare trusts I had established for Piper and Kit, the knee. The money that had been meant to fund the beginning of a replacement family went instead into the futures of the children they had dismissed as insufficient. The ones who hadn't been the right kind of heir. I found that appropriate. Perfume. Whitmore Academy was everything I'd remembered, and everything I'd needed it to be for them. Piper called me in the 3rd week of summer session to say that the painting faculty had asked whether she'd be interested in developing a college arts portfolio. She was 11 years old. She cried a little. I cried a little, then. She told me about her new friend from Ohio, and we talked about cold press paper and archival fixative for 20 minutes, and it was the best conversation I'd had in years. Kit emailed me a schematic with the subject line, "Look at this." 1 image, 1 sentence. They have a better oscilloscope than I have ever used. I printed the schematic and pinned it to my studio wall. Perfume. The rental house in Portland was quieter than our old life. I found a place in a neighborhood where I didn't know anyone yet, with a small backyard where I planted native grasses and sedums on a Saturday morning without checking my email once. I got my hands dirty. I didn't perform calm for anyone. It felt like standing up straight after years of bracing for something. The final dissolution decree came through on a Thursday afternoon. Sole legal and physical custody, full financial settlement, support terms binding for a decade, with a percentage of future bonuses included. Ridgeline Capital LLC was dissolved by court order, remaining assets transferred and distributed. My husband's partnership track at his firm was quietly restructured. 2 key clients chose not to renew. The case was sealed, but sealed doesn't mean silent in a city like Portland, where everyone eventually knows someone who knows someone. 4 months after the decree, I got a text from an unknown number. I knew before I opened it. He told me you were cold and that you controlled everything. That the marriage had been finished for years before we got together. He said it was practically done. I didn't know about the money. I swear I didn't know about any of it. I'm sorry. I read it once. I thought about responding, not to be cruel, not to be generous, but because the sheer waste of all of it hit me then with a completeness I hadn't let myself feel before. All those years. All those small, deliberate choices he made in the direction of something else. The way he'd built a whole secret architecture and called it a future. I didn't respond. I blocked the number. I put the phone down and went to water the sedums. Piper and Kit came home for winter break. The house was warm and smelled like the rosemary wreath I'd hung on the front door and the soup that had been on the stove all afternoon. Kit came in first, taller, his voice doing something new at the lower register. Heavium. He dropped his bag, looked around the kitchen, looked at the backyard through the glass doors. The grasses made it, he said. They did. Piper came in behind him, wearing a paint-stained jacket that looked exactly like something I would have worn at her age. She walked through the kitchen slowly, ran her hand along the counter, and looked at me. It feels real here, she said. Our old house felt like a photo in a magazine. This one feels like it's actually ours. She was right. I had known that without letting myself say it for longer than I wanted to count. We ate dinner at the kitchen table. Kit told me about the regional robotics tournament. Second place, behind a team from a specialized STEM high school, which he considered a moral victory and a reasonable calibration of his current skill level. Piper told me about the portrait series she'd started at school. Everyday people in everyday moments, and that the painting instructor had called them quietly devastating, which was, I thought, the most accurate description of Piper herself that anyone had managed. After dinner, Kit said, without any particular lead-up, Dad sent an email. A link to an article about sustainable urban development. He said he thought I'd find it interesting. Did you? It was about permeable pavement. I already know about permeable pavement. He picked up his glass. I didn't write back. I didn't have anything to say to him. Piper looked at her hands. He texted me too. Said he hoped school was going well. She shrugged, a small, settled shrug. I told him it was and that I had to get to a critique session, which was true. They weren't angry. They were done. There is a difference, and it matters. Anger is still a relationship, still a live wire between two people. This was something quieter than that. A door that had been left open for years and had finally been allowed, without drama, to close. I reached across and held their hands, one each. You get to decide, I said. Both of you, always. What you say, how much you give, what you're willing to carry. Those are your choices to make, not obligations you were born into. Piper nodded. Kit said simply, we know. Later, after they'd gone to bed, I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee and looked at the backyard in the dark. The native grasses moved a little in the December wind. I had chosen every plant in that garden for its resilience. Species suited to this specific soil, the specific rain that would come back every spring without being coaxed or maintained, that simply grew because growing was what they were built for. I had spent 11 years decorating over damage, designing beautiful things on top of a foundation I hadn't let myself examine. I was good at surfaces. I had always been good at surfaces. But the ground under us now was real, chosen deliberately, tested hard, and ours. In the morning, Piper would leave paint on the counter, and Kit would spread schematics across the kitchen table, and I would make coffee and look out at the grasses and know exactly what I had. Not what came before. Not what was taken. Not the shape of a life that had been quietly, carefully built around our absence. This, the three of us, unshakable.